How's everybody doing? Is your mind blown? Are you? Yeah. Okay. Wasn't that awesome? Yeah. I love listening to Caleb. I hate following him, but I love listening to Caleb. So kills it every time he picks up the mic. So appreciate that. This morning, I'm going to continue talking a little bit about some of the moral philosophical problems of hell, and then we're going to look at some of the parables of Jesus, which a lot of our hell imagery is drawn from. And I'm going to try to go shorter than I normally go, just so we don't keep you here all afternoon and we can have time for a little bit of Q&A, okay? So I might condense what I was going to say a little bit, smash it all down so we can have more time to do but still I might. So we have more time to do the Q&A, just because that's a really important, if we are still doing that is. Only because that's questions come up there that maybe we haven't thought of addressing. So we definitely want to make sure we leave time for that. So last night, for those of you who weren't here, I talked a little bit about the moral philosophical problems of the eternal conscious torment model of hell. I think any model of hell pretty much, but I'll say that one because I think it's the most despicable version of hell that we've come up with. A version of hell in which, as its name suggests, one is tormented eternally while being conscious. Can you think of anything more disgusting than that? Yet, if you believe it is the creation of God, you really have no choice but to declare it to be good and holy, even if you have to do it grudgingly and through gritted teeth. To claim that it's bad and even to lament the fate of those who are trapped within its gates is actually a subtle form of rebellion against the God who creates and sustains it, if you believe it exists. So the only path of belief in that type of hell can lead you down is a path of immorality, because you will be forced to abdicate your ability to feel empathy for those locked within it in order to maintain the goodness of your God. Also, if this place exists, where presently billions and billions and billions of people are being tormented, if this place exists, it only can exist because God gives it its existence. If it exists outside of him, it is a godlike creature in its own right. Because everything that does exist derives its existence from the one for whom and through whom all things find their existence. So if this place exists, God is upholding it and God is giving it its existence. It cannot be separated from him, even though we like to claim that hell is a place of eternal separation from God. As I said last night, I think the reason we claim that is because unconsciously we know this place of eternal conscious torment to be an immoral place and an immoral concept, and so we want to distance our God from it so we can keep our hell and still keep our morality intact when we sing how great is our God. So we have to claim he's separate from it in order for us to be able to claim he's good while not feeling bad for doing so. Yet there is no mountain of proof texts claiming that hell is a place of eternal separation from God. Just a few out of context passages that we use to sort of prove that idea, but we're really pulling it out of thin air, and it arises from our need to remove and separate God from hell. So again, we can claim he's great while also keeping our hell and not feeling guilty for claiming he's great in light of the hell that he must be giving existence to if it exists. So we talked a little bit about that last night. Now, I want to kind of pick up on some things that I didn't get to last night, and then we'll get into some parables. And I might just be a little bit random and all over the place this morning, and I hope that's okay. And I hope in the midst of it, I'll say something that makes some sense. So, let's talk about, I said last night that everything this doctrine touches, if you hold to it, it defiles. Heaven becomes hell if hell exists, right? And God becomes the most immoral of beings for creating and sustaining it. Now, another reason that God becomes the most immoral of beings, if such a place exists, is that really he gives us very little warning about it in the book we call inerrant. Right? This book we want to claim is without error and is the perfect revelation of God to humanity is really, it really lacks in any real warning about this place. And if this is God's perfect and revealed word to us, and it's so lacking in any warnings concerning hell, then the one who gave it to us really screwed up. Right? So let's go back. Now, I'm not, this timeline doesn't actually work, but let's just think like the typical evangelical Christian this morning, and I'm going to lay some things out as that worldview sort of sees things, and we're just going to kind of deconstruct those from within that worldview without replacing them with something else. We're just going to kind of hang out in that worldview and show how it doesn't work. Okay, so for the evangelical Christian, everything starts in the Garden of Eden, right? We eat a piece of produce that a speaking serpent promises will make us godlike, and God gets eternally pissed at all of humanity and decrees that we will all burn for biting into a piece of fruit through Adam that we thought would make us godlike. And that's the problem. So now this place of torment that was originally prepared for a fallen angel and his minions becomes our eternal destiny as well, all because of a stupid piece of fruit. And that's where it all begins. Now, number one, God really failed in not warning Adam and Eve that their eating from this tree would result in hellfire and brimstone for literally every single human being who would ever be born after them, including them. Right? You're like, well, that's what he said. He said in the day that they would eat it, they would die. Yeah, but he should have been a little bit more specific by what he meant by death, if what he actually meant was, I'm going to supernaturally sustain you for all of eternity and roast you forever and force you to watch on giant screens every opportunity you had to repent, but white-knuckled your way through. He should have been a little bit more specific. Instead of saying, you'll die, he should have said, like, you'll spend eternity in hell. But no, but it's not there. Then after they partake from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, there's curses decreed, right? And let's take a look at them. Serpent, no more legs. Nothing about hell. Man, you're going to have to become a farmer. Nothing about hell. Woman, having kids, it's going to hurt. Those are the punishments. Those are the curses decreed and proclaimed. Nothing about hell. Nothing about, and unless you repent, you're going to burn forever in your own fat. None of that. I mean, come on. How much more immoral can you get than that? If at the very beginning, as we understand it within evangelical Christianity, God did not this is like the primary thing, guys. This is what it's all about. Everything I say to you from here on out is going to be about you avoiding this place. But right at the very beginning, all he can do is take snakes' legs away and make having babies hurt without any mention of hellfire or brimstone. That seems like something he should have mentioned. Maybe it's just me, but I would have liked to have had a little warning. So then we say, why do people go to hell? Well, because God is so holy and righteous, and he's given us his perfect law, and we've broken the eternal law of a perfectly holy God, and so it warrants an eternal punishment. Yet, even at the giving of the law, there's no mention of hell. The only punishments for breaking the law was, the worst it got was death, right? Hebrews 2:2 says that every violation of the law received its just penalty. And never is there anything written in Torah about transgressing the law, meaning that you'll end up in a Christless sulfuric concentration camp in the center of the earth. Right? The writer of Hebrews tells us that every violation of the law, it came with its just penalty. So again, God is really screwing it up here. God would be, listen to me, for not warning us, God would be responsible for everyone who is presently burning there because it's his fault we didn't know. Because he didn't tell us. When you get into the New Testament, look at the preaching of the Apostle Paul. He says that he fully proclaimed the gospel. He was free of the blood of all men, and yet he never mentions Gehenna. He never elaborates on hell or what the post-mortem, fate of the unbeliever is. And yet he says he's fully proclaimed the gospel and he's free of the blood of all men. And he never saw fit to write about hell. In fact, in the opening line of Galatians, he proclaims that his gospel announces liberation from the present evil age, not from post-mortem torment. it introduces us to a whole new cosmos, to a whole new way of living and existing in the world. It doesn't give us a bus ticket to heaven so we can escape an eternity in hell. So here's a man saying he fully proclaimed the gospel, and he never talks about hell as we talk about hell today. So again, you could see that God himself, in not warning us of this place, would be responsible for everyone who went there. Because if he created it, he would be responsible for giving us warnings concerning it, but he doesn't. And so anyone who goes there is there because they weren't warned by him. Okay. Just something to think about. Now, let's check this out. So now we also claim that God's given us this inerrant Bible, right? That was pretty much just blown to bits in the last session, right? But we claim God's given us this inerrant Bible. In fact, you have to now, isn't it amazing how long the list of things you must confess to be true has become since Jesus, in order for you to be a Christian? It used to just be like the confession, Jesus is Lord kind of thing. But now you must confess the Bible is inerrant, the earth is only 6,000 years old, and Donald Trump is God's man for America. And that's how you become a Christian. That list has grown tremendously. Well, you must confess, if you start questioning inerrancy, the fundamentalists will begin questioning your Christianity. Okay? So let's just go on the assumption that the Bible is inerrant, that it doesn't err in anything. It's all God's perfect and direct word to us. Everything we need to know is in that book. Okay, well, let's take a look at some inerrant passages. Ecclesiastes 3:18 through 23. I also said to myself, as for humans, God tests them so that they may see that they are like animals. Surely the fate of human beings is like that of the animals. The same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so dies the other. Right? So the teacher here is saying, look, human and animals die the same way. The same fate awaits them both. All have the same breath. Humans have no advantage over animals. Everything is meaningless. All go to the same place. All come from dust, and to dust all return. Who knows if the human spirit rises upward and if the spirit of the animal goes down into the earth? So I saw that there is nothing better for a person than to enjoy their work, because that is their lot. For who can bring them to see what will happen after them? So the teacher of Ecclesiastes says, look, guys, animals, humans, you die, you all go to the same place. So just enjoy life, work hard, make your vocation your vacation kind of thing, and just enjoy life, because there's nothing more awaiting you afterwards. Everything's meaningless. Nice pick-me-up in the morning. Excuse me, in the afternoon. Ecclesiastes 9:1 through 11. So I reflected on all this and concluded that the righteous and the wise and what they do are in God's hands, but no one knows whether love or hate awaits them. All share a common destiny, the righteous and the wicked, the good and the bad, the clean and the unclean, those who offer sacrifices and those who do not. As it is with the good, so with the sinful. As it is with those who take oaths, so with those who are afraid to take them. This is the evil in everything that happens under the sun. The same destiny overtakes all. The hearts of people, moreover, are full of evil, and there is madness in their hearts while they live, and afterwards they join the dead. And anyone who is among the living has hope, because even a live dog is better off than a dead lion. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no further reward, and even their name is forgotten. Their love, their hate, and their jealousy have long since vanished. Never again will they have a part in anything that happens under the sun. Go eat your food with gladness and drink your wine with a joyful heart, for God has already approved what you do. Always be clothed in white, and always anoint your head with oil. Enjoy life with your wife, whom you love, all the days of this meaningless life that God has given you under the sun, all your meaningless days, for this is your lot in life and in your toilsome labor under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might, for in the realm of the dead, where you are going, there is neither working, nor planning, nor knowledge, nor wisdom. The teacher in Ecclesiastes says, look, guys, righteous, wicked, those who offer sacrifices, those who don't, those considered clean, those considered unclean, when they die, they all go to the same place, which is back to the dust, so you might as well enjoy life while there's breath in your lungs. Now, unless you believe that the Bible is sort of in a discussion with itself, how do you make this fit together with talk of resurrection, even talk of resurrection in Daniel, where some are raised, for glory, some to, disgrace and things like that? How do you make these things fit together? Obviously, the Bible, as John Caputo says, it's not a book, it's a library of books, a bibliothèque, and the biblical view is a fiction. The idea that there is a biblical view of the afterlife, the idea that there is a biblical view of marriage, the idea that there is a biblical view of anything is a fiction. There are always several biblical views. And this is one of them. In a supposedly inerrant Bible, one of the biblical views of the afterlife is there's nothing, so live it up now. Now, if the Bible is inerrant and God literally possessed the writers who wrote it and guided their hands and gave us all of this directly from heaven, how irresponsible of him to let something like this end up in the text if there is an eternal hell that awaits all who don't believe in him. How irresponsible and how immoral would it be for God to have allowed this in the Bible? Which is just like, don't worry about anything, everything's okay, you all die and you all go to the same place. Righteous, wicked, those who sacrifice, those who don't, clean, unclean, same thing. See, in this world of, evangelical Protestantism, fundamentalism, where the Bible is inerrant and this eternal hell exists, God is a very shady and immoral character who creates the worst of fates for the smallest of offenses and gives us very little warning about it. Claims to have given us a perfectly inerrant book and has confusing statements thrown in all throughout, telling us, hey, don't worry, there's nothing afterwards, whereas other ones seem to suggest, no, there really is something afterwards. Who do I believe? What way do I turn? In this worldview, God is a corrupt, shady, immoral character who, again, does not deserve the upraised hands of human worship, but the upraised fist of human rebellion. Because he's not made things clear. And if I go to hell, or if you go to hell, it's really his fault for not making things more clear. Okay. Now, you guys okay? Okay. Now let's talk a little bit more about some stuff here. Okay, 1 Corinthians 13. Paul tells us that love never ends. Love will survive even the revelation of perfection. Love will survive the eschaton. However you interpret what that perfection is, at the revelation of perfection, love will still endure because love is not, an emotion. Love is the very essence of who God is. So love endures forever. So anything that endures forever has love as its source. Love or God is its source of existence. Love or God is where it derives its existence from. Now, if hell is eternal and endures forever, it would have to be a manifestation or an extension of love. Yet here's the definition of love Paul gives in 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7. Love is patient. Let's just stop there. If hell is eternal, hell has to be an extension of God or of love, and we're told that love is patient. What need is there for patience in the eternal conscious torment model of hell? You're not trying to get anyone to repent. You're not trying to get anyone to change their mind. You're not trying to purge them. You're just tormenting them for the sake of tormenting them. Why is patience needed in a hell like that? Patience is only needed when you're trying to accomplish something. In hell, God is apparently just torturing us for the sake of torturing us. But if it endures forever, it has to be an extension of love, and love is patient. Love is kind. Where is the kindness in hell? How is there any kindness in a 16-year-old who gets in a car accident? I mean, he's been past that mythical line called the age of accountability for only 4 years, friends. And yet at 16, when you can't even keep your room clean, you're supposed to be responsible enough to have made a decision that determines your eternal fate. And in a drunken stupor, this kid dies in a car accident or something, okay? Which I served as a youth pastor for 11 years, and I had to deal with that kind of stuff all the time. And with weeping parents who thought that their child was burning in hell at that moment because of the state they were in when they died. And this child dies experiencing trauma and horror and awakes to trauma and horror coming his way directly from the hands of God. Where's the kindness in that? Where's the kindness in the 90-year-old Jewish man who dies in Auschwitz as an atheist because he couldn't compute how the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob could let such terrible things happen to his chosen people? And so he dies cursing God, experiencing the worst that men could do, and he awakes to infinitely worse coming to him from the hands of God. And somehow that's kind. How could we call that kindness? I remember when I was a youth pastor, there was a woman in our church whose grandson died because he was at a party and he was flirting with a young lady that wasn't his girlfriend. She was with someone else, and two guys grabbed him, threw him in a back bedroom, and just stomped on him and killed him. Just stomped on him and kicked his head in, killed him. And I remember her being just a tearful mess in a basket case because she couldn't pinpoint where in his life he prayed a sinner's prayer and accepted Jesus. And she was like just losing her mind over this for weeks and weeks and weeks until she finally found, through talking to some relative somewhere, that when he was about 4 years old, he prayed a sinner's prayer at a vacation Bible school. And so then she could finally rest when she believed that at some point in his life he'd prayed a sinner's prayer, so he must have been right with God. But had he not done that, in her mind, this young man would have been being tormented in a place of fire and godlessness for all of eternity. Died experiencing the worst that humans could dish out, and he awoke to the worst that God could dish out. And there's no longer the sweet relief of death to hope for, just nothing but wave after wave of divine wrath forever and ever and ever. For a young man who died experiencing the worst that humans could do. Where's the kindness in that? If that endures forever, love must be its source, but love is kind. Where's kindness in that? It doesn't envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it doesn't dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered. And billions of people are burning alive in hell right now only because our naked progenitors bit into an apple, like in some mythical garden 6,000 years ago. That sounds like being easily angered to me. Love, it keeps no record of wrongs. That's the very basis of what hell is. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects. It always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Well, we got to give hell that. It certainly does persevere, since it lasts for eternity. If hell is eternal, hell must be an extension or a manifestation of love. And yet it doesn't really align with any of the things Paul tells us about love. Therefore, it's either not eternal or it doesn't exist. I'll go for doesn't exist. All right, but what about Jesus? Because, maybe God didn't warn about it in Eden. Maybe there's nothing in the law about hell. Maybe Paul didn't talk about it too much, but surely Jesus talked about hell a whole lot, so we're told. In fact, we've been told since we were kids that Jesus preached twice as much about hell as he did about heaven, right? It really matters what the sermon is. Jesus always talked twice about whatever you might think is important based on what sermon you're listening to, right? So sometimes Jesus spoke twice as much about money as he did everything else. Jesus spoke twice as much about hell as he did about heaven, just to kind of emphasize, how important the subject is. So if you bring up the love of God and whatever, universalism or something like that, well, Jesus talked twice as much about hell as he did about heaven, so how can you say that there is no hell? Okay, well, let's talk about this for just a little bit. What did Jesus talk about when he talked about hell? Well, I'm not going to go into this too much because you guys have probably heard this talked and expounded on many, 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 many times. But Jesus uses two words that get translated as hell in like the King James or New King James Version of the Bible. Okay, that's Gehenna and that's Hades, right? So let's talk about Gehenna for just a few minutes. N.T. Wright in, I believe this is from Surprised by Hope, says the most common New Testament word, sometimes translated by hell, is Gehenna. Gehenna was a place, not just an idea. It was the rubbish heap outside the southwest corner of the old city of Jerusalem. But as with his language about heaven, so with his talk of Gehenna. Once Christian readers had been sufficiently distanced from the original meaning of the words, alternative images would come to mind, generated not by Jesus or the New Testament, but by the stock of images, some of them extremely lurid, supplied by ancient and medieval folklore and imagination. So Jesus does talk about Gehenna, but the Gehenna Jesus talked about is not the Gehenna we talk about. What Jesus meant when he talked about Gehenna is not what we mean when we talk about Gehenna. What Jesus' hearers heard when he talked about Gehenna is not what we hear when someone speaks to us about Gehenna. This idea changes, it becomes different things over time. So now some will say that in the time of Jesus, Gehenna was only this garbage dump outside of the city where the bodies of criminals were thrown and fires were kept burning there continuously and all this kind of stuff. But that's not entirely true. Gehenna did come to be associated with the idea of post-mortem judgment and punishment in the days prior to Jesus and after Jesus. And so some of Jesus' listeners would have had that understanding of Gehenna when Jesus spoke of Gehenna. Here's some quotes from the Babylonian Talmud, some of which represent thoughts and ideas in circulation in the time of Jesus about this place called Gehenna. It wasn't just a garbage dump in their minds. It was a place of post-mortem punishment as well. So here's some quotes about Gehenna. Now, what do we think about it right now? It's a place where the burning never ends and the torment never ceases, right? Okay, here's what some of Jesus' listeners would have thought about Gehenna. The punishment of the wicked in Gehenna only lasts 12 months. That's a lot shorter than eternity. Hell has 3 gates, one in the desert, one in the sea, and one in Jerusalem. So for us, hell is this initially it's like in the center of the earth, and then we learn more about, geology and how the earth actually works, and then it becomes this like spiritual place that exists out there somewhere. But in the time of Jesus, it was something with gates that one could access, where there were like unique geographic features. Superstitious people would make up myths about those things. And this is the entrance to hell. This is the entrance to Hades. This is where the gods live on top of this mountain. So it was literally believed that hell had 3 gates, one of them in the sea, one of them in the desert, and one in Jerusalem. You could actually find this place. You knock on the door, the peephole opens, you give the secret word, and you're in, man. Okay? Lasts 12 months, it has 3 gates. It's something like local. 3 persons will never come to Gehenna. He who suffers from extreme poverty, just quit your job, you'll be fine. He who suffers with a diseased stomach, eat a lot of Taco Bell, I guess, and you're good. And one who is oppressed by the government. So there's a whole lot of people who never need to worry. And others add also the man who is afflicted with a bad wife. Yeah, yes. So I'm not going to ask you who of you is feeling extremely liberated right now, but yeah. It doesn't say the only person who will escape Gehenna is the one who has a personal relationship with God, through the person of Jesus Christ, who's trusting in the finished works of Christ alone for his salvation. All this mythical language about diseased stomachs, governmental oppression, and bad wives. Here's another little tidbit about hell or Gehenna that you may not have known. The atmosphere of Gehenna was created before the world, but the fire of Gehenna was created at twilight on the eve of Sabbath. Just in case you ever wanted to know. Its atmosphere was completed before creation, but it was only filled with the fire that now torments the damned at twilight on the eve of Sabbath. So, all good things to know, right? So, anyways, what I'm trying to tell you here is simply that the Gehenna we have all come to know and love is not the Gehenna that Jesus' contemporaries knew and loved. And so when he said the word, they thought something different than we think. right? Just like if I go back to the 90s and I say, hey, have you seen Batman, the Batman movies? And someone's thinking like the Tim Burton Batman movies. If I go back to the 60s and I say, have you seen the Batman movie? Everyone's thinking the Adam West incarnation of Batman. If I would have said it, now everyone's thinking the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight trilogy. If I say it in a couple weeks, everyone will be thinking the Zack Snyder Batman versus Superman. I am a nerd, by the way. So it depends on which era you ask the question in, how people see what you're talking about. So to us, Gehenna is this place that all people go universally who don't know and believe on Jesus. It's just out there somewhere. We know you can't dig to it. That's just silly. We know it doesn't have 3 gates. No one escapes unless they have a personal relationship with Jesus. But in Jesus' day, you could have just had a bad wife. You could get there if you knew where the gate was. And it's only going to last 12 months anyway, so don't freak out too much. And even then in the Babylonian Talmud, other people say something else. It only lasts 12 months for some, and it lasts longer for others. Certain ones will be trampled down and turned into ash and simply cease to be, and others will be there for... So it didn't mean just one thing. And so you need to understand that. And it also was a very real place. Okay? And that real place became a metaphor for, post-mortem judgment or this kind of like whatever. Just so you know that. Okay, so how was Jesus using it when he used the term? Well, again, I think you have to look at each instance and decide how he's using it. It doesn't just always mean one thing. Okay, so look, for instance, Matthew 10:28. Jesus says, don't fear those who can kill the body but can't hurt the soul. Fear the one, rather, who can destroy both body and soul in Gehenna. Right? Never mind the fact that he goes on in verses 30 and 31 to say, hey, look, sparrows aren't very valuable to you all, yet not one of them falls without your Father's heart being moved by it. But even the very hairs on your head are numbered, so don't be afraid. You're worth more than many sparrows. That's spoken right after he says, fear the one who can destroy both body and soul in Gehenna. Fear the one who can destroy both body and soul in Gehenna, but don't worry. The very hairs of your head are numbered, so don't be afraid. Never mind that part. Let's just talk about it for a minute. The one who can destroy both body and soul in hell. How is this typically interpreted by your typical evangelical? That this must be speaking of the lake of fire mentioned in Revelation 20. Why? Because it says that body and soul will be tormented there. And according to the way that they read the book of the Revelation, bodies only end up in hell after the final resurrection. Right? And then everything's cast into the lake of fire. Before, you're just a little disembodied spirit being tormented in a lesser version of hell, but after the resurrection, you get your body back, so your nerve endings actually get to scream now. Your entire being gets to get in on the party now. So it's body and soul. So many assume that this must be talking about the lake of fire because it's body and soul. Okay, but here's something interesting. You get to Matthew 23, 33 through 36. Read what Jesus says. You snakes, you brood of vipers, how will you escape being condemned to Gehenna? Okay. Therefore, I am sending you prophets and sages and teachers. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Others you will flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town. And so upon you will come all the righteous blood that has been shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Truly I tell you, all this will come upon this generation. What's going to come upon this generation? How can you escape being condemned to Gehenna? Jesus tells them they're going to be in Gehenna within a generation. Now, if Gehenna is the lake of fire where body and soul are both tormented together, that final resurrection would have had to have occurred within a generation in order for them to be there. But it didn't. Now, again, I'm just looking at this from within an evangelical context. I'm not even going to try to get into what this may or may not mean. I'm just trying to help you see that from within that system, these beliefs don't even work. Right? Within that system, this couldn't be the lake of fire, since they were supposed to be in the lake of fire, if that's what's being talked about here, within a generation, yet that resurrection most certainly had not yet occurred. So what's going on? Perhaps the book of the Revelation is simply an apocalypse, which uses very colorful and cartoonish imagery, like all apocalypses do, to describe something that probably looked much less cataclysmic in the real world than it did within the book. Maybe. Maybe Jesus isn't actually warning them about some post-mortem fate that awaits everyone who doesn't pray a sinner's prayer before they breathe their final breath. Maybe he's warning them of how things escalate when we live certain ways, when we live in disharmony with the nature of the God he reveals, how we lead ourselves down destructive paths. Maybe that's more what he's talking about than a literal, Christless concentration camp at the center of the earth. Who knows? But I'm just trying to show you that a lot of these images we try to string together and use to build this, cohesive doctrine of hell. It's not cohesive at all. It doesn't work. If we actually start poking holes in stuff, we realize, this thing that we think is so solid is actually as thin as a communion wafer, and it crumbles when you just begin to poke it even the slightest bit. It just doesn't work. All right, anyways, I told you I might be random and all over the map this morning, and I hope that's okay. Is this making sense anyways, somehow? Okay. Let's go to Matthew 5. Matthew 5:21. Read how Jesus uses Gehenna here. It says, "You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court, and anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of Gehenna." Gee, that sure escalated quickly. We went from earthly consequences to being confined to hell forever, just because you got a little bit more insulting. We usually stop there and don't keep reading. But if you do, you read this. "Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar, go first and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift." Relationship is always more important than sacrifice. "Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny." Here, Gehenna is not something that we escape by praying a sinner's prayer. It's something that we escape by making up with those who have aught against us. Not because God can't let you into heaven if there's unforgiveness in your heart, but because Gehenna can represent very real-world consequences that we bring down upon ourselves when we allow our relationships to fracture and when we live in tension with one another. We create these consequences. So be reconciled to the one who has something against you. And this isn't something you end up having to face. Does that make sense? Okay, check this out. Jeremiah chapter 7, 30 through 33. "The people of Judah have done evil in my eyes, declares the Lord. They have set up their detestable idols in the house that bears my name, and they have defiled it. They have built the high places of Topheth in the valley of Ben Hinnom." That's the valley of Gehenna. That's Gehenna, okay? "To burn their sons and daughters in the fire, something I did not command, nor did it enter my mind. So beware, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when people will no longer call it Topheth or the valley of Ben Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter, for they will bury the dead in Topheth until there is no more room." What's being described here? God, through Jeremiah here, however you look at that, is saying, look, this place that is notorious for child sacrifice that has been performed there, where children were burned alive to pagan gods, if you don't heed my words, which in the context here, the word that they're being told to heed is like when you're invaded by Babylon, don't resist, don't fight back, surrender, or else you will be killed and your city will be burned, right? So go peaceably, right? Choose the way of peace rather than the way of war. Choose the way of life rather than the way of death. And those are the words used in Jeremiah, okay? That's what they're being warned against doing. They opt for the death and the war path, and that's what comes upon them. They're taken as slaves, the temple's destroyed, their city's burned, and they die. Right? And so he says this valley that's been notorious for child sacrifice, it's going to become notorious for something else, because when the Babylonians kill you, they're going to throw your bodies there, and it's now going to remind you not of the child sacrifices offered there to pagan gods, but what happened when you didn't choose peace over violence. And this isn't something that should be attributed to God. This is just how life works when we choose war over peace. Right? And so he's like, this valley will become notorious for something else. It will no longer remind you of children being made to burn in fire in the name of some other god's, holiness. He's like, such a thing never even entered my mind. I would have never commanded or required such a thing. Isn't it interesting then that we have taken the name of the very valley in which things occurred that God said he would have never been a part of, and we've used it to describe a place where God is said to be burning children alive forever? Jeremiah says, look, this will remind you of the consequences of choosing war over peace, violence over peace. And so when Jesus uses the phrase, when Jesus uses the term, when he uses the word Gehenna, perhaps that is what he has in mind. Perhaps in Matthew 21, when you have the temple cleansing incident in Matthew's gospel, and Jesus quotes from Jeremiah chapter 7, when he says that you've made my father's house a den of robbers, perhaps we're supposed to follow through with that Jeremiah 7 logic until it brings us to the point where there's this warning about choosing peace over violence, but where you end up if you don't choose peace over violence. And maybe when we get to Matthew 23 and Jesus tells the religious leaders of his day, look, you're going to be in Gehenna within a generation, maybe he literally had in mind, or maybe the author, looking back on the events of the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70 or 70 CE, had that in mind. That something similar happened to Jerusalem, to what happened to Jerusalem in the days of Jeremiah. That they brought destruction upon themselves because they chose war over peace. And that could be described as a Gehenna of sorts. Right? And so, whereas Gehenna was something that the sinner was threatened with by the religious leaders of the day, it was something Jesus symbolically threatened the religious leaders with. When you live the way that the holiness of the God you worship demands you live, it's actually you who go to Gehenna, not those you deem fit for Gehenna. Okay. Just some thoughts. Let's talk about Lazarus and the rich man for a minute. Okay? Let's go to Luke 16. So the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, the imagery from this parable, this is what we pull from all the time when we talk about hell, right? This is like one of the main passages we use to populate our imaginary hell. We populate our imaginary hell with imagery from this parable. Okay? And anytime you bring this up, you begin to talk about, hell, whatever. This is what everyone brings up. But what about Lazarus and the rich man? Jesus was very descriptive when he talked about hell. So let's read it. Let's go to Jeremiah 16, and let's begin in verse 13. Read to 15, and then we'll go to 19. Okay? Jesus says, no slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. The Pharisees, who were lovers of money, heard all this, and they ridiculed him. So he said to them, you are those who justify yourselves in the sight of others, but God knows your hearts. For what is prized by human beings is an abomination in the sight of God. So what's the context here? Is he talking about the universal sinfulness of all humanity and how we all deserve damnation? No, he's talking to one group of people who love wealth. Okay? So when we go into the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, don't go in thinking that the setup is humankind is universally sinful and deserve punishment. No, he's talking to one very specific group of people about one very specific problem. And that's their love of wealth, and they're assuming that wealth represents the favor and blessing of God. Okay, so then he starts in verse 19. There was a rich man. There's also a parable that kicks off Luke 16 that starts with, there was a rich man. Now, some insist that the parable of Lazarus and the rich man is not a parable because of the language used. Yet it starts the same way the other parable starts at the beginning of Luke 16. There was a rich man. Okay, there was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores. The poor man died and was carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. And in Hades, where he was being tormented, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. And he called out, Father Abraham, have mercy on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames. Now, why do disembodied spirits actually need to drink water anyways? Right? I mean, so just so you understand, you're reading a parable, okay? But Abraham said, Child, remember that during your lifetime you received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner evil things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. Besides all this, between you and us, a great chasm has been fixed, so that those who might want to pass from here to you cannot do so, and no one can cross from there to us. And he said, Then, Father, I beg you to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may warn them, so that they will not also come to this place of torment. But Abraham replied, They have the Gospels. They have Billy Graham. They should listen to them. No, he says, they have Moses and the prophets, and they should listen to them. And he said, No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent. And he said to him, If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead. Now, a couple important points. Number one, this is a parable. The language makes that very clear. You're not supposed to take this literally. N.T. Wright says there's no literal description of the afterlife going on here, just a parable. 2, the setup is not about the general sinfulness of humanity and how we all deserve an eternity in hell because our naked, forefathers ate a piece of produce in a garden that a talking snake said would make them godlike. It has nothing to do with any of that. This is about wealth-loving religious leaders and their exclusion of others. Okay? 4, the evangelical doctrine of salvation is completely missing from the parable. Right? And this is the passage that most evangelicals turn to when they want to prove that Jesus talked about hell, therefore it must be real. Yet how is it said that one can escape this fate of Hades in the parable? By listening to Moses and the prophets. No evangelical would claim that that's how you get saved. Salvation is in trusting in the finished works of Christ alone. Even some of my grace friends use this to try to prop up the belief in eternal conscious torment. Yet they would lose their minds if they ever heard someone proclaiming that salvation could be found in Moses or the prophets. And Abraham said, look, if they want to avoid this place, let them listen to Moses and the prophets and they can avoid it. But if they won't listen to them, they won't listen even to someone who rises from the dead. So the evangelical doctrine of salvation is missing. Right? So you can't claim this is about hell and hold on to the doctrine of salvation that so many of us hold on to. Right? Another interesting thought here, and this is just a thought, is that the name Lazarus is the shortened form of the Hebrew named Eliezer. Now, it's not that uncommon of a name, so it just could have been a name that Jesus was using. But I think there could be something more going on in the parable than Jesus just simply using a popular name. Eliezer, in connection with Abraham, who was Eliezer to Abraham? Eliezer of Damascus, this was his Gentile slave, right? And in Genesis 15, 2-4, Abram says, O sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. Then the word of the Lord came to him, This man will not be your heir, but a son coming from your own body will be your heir. So here we have a story about a rich man who represents the religious leaders who love wealth, who based on their national identity, think that they are the heirs of all the promises given to Abraham, right? And yet when this character who is to represent them dies, he doesn't go to Abraham, but one named Eliezer goes to Abraham. The very one that God said to Abraham, this one won't inherit your estate. Those who come from your body will inherit your estate. So Jesus is essentially saying, look, your national identity really doesn't mean anything. That's not what this is all about here. You're taking pride in the wrong things, and you think your salvation lies in the wrong things. Does that make sense? All right. Now, check this out. In the Talmud, we read this: the fires of hell cannot gain access to the bodies of the sinners of Israel because Abraham the patriarch, seeing that they are circumcised, rescues them. So the fires of Hades, according to some Jewish thought, wasn't supposed to be able to touch the Israelite because Abraham's lifting up skirts, seeing that you're circumcised, and then sending you back. He's like, nope, you're in. Okay, you can go back. And yet here it's Abraham who is saying to the one who is supposed to be safe from this because of his national identity, no, the more important things are caring for the poor and needy, which you neglected to do. And so now you're tormented and he's saved. This is just a classic role reversal tale, where what's expected is not what is received. This isn't Jesus actually telling us this is how it works out. If you want to believe that that's what it is, you have to change your entire doctrine of salvation in order to make it work. This is Jesus doing what Jesus does best, which is using parables to show those who think they're on the inside that by their own logic they're actually on the outside. Now I think they actually are included, but according to their own logic, it's they who are actually the outsiders. So it's sort of like, look, if you want to play this exclusion game, I will play it with you. But it's not going to work the way you think it's going to work. If we play by your rules, it's actually you who lose. So that's what a lot of the parables are. It's Jesus using their own language and their own beliefs and their own logic to show how, if this is how things worked, it's actually they who are on the outside and not on the inside. So the parable of Lazarus and the rich man is a classic role reversal story, not a literal description of how things will play out in the afterlife. Okay? Now, let's talk about the parable of the sheep and the goats. And there's a lot of stuff we're just not covering because there's a lot of stuff. It would take forever to cover it all. So I just wanted to hit these two parables that I think are important, that are the ones that people usually pull out when you're talking about hell. So let's talk about the parable of the sheep and the goats now. Let's go to Matthew chapter 25, 31. It says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. Note the manner in which he comes. Sitting on his throne in all of his glory, attended by angels. It's a glorious scene, yeah? Okay, and then all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats, and he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at the left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, come you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you? And the king will answer them, truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. Then he will say to those at his left hand, you that are accursed, depart from me into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not give me clothing. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. Then they will also answer, Lord, when was it we saw you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and didn't take care of you? Then he will answer them, truly I tell you, just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. Now, there's a couple important points to make before we look at it any further, but the word punishment's the word kolossus, which speaks of something remedial, speaks of something that has an end to it, that speaks of something that is for the purpose of pruning and purging and cleansing. But beyond that, again, the evangelical doctrine of salvation is curiously missing from this whole thing. We're talking about people going away into eternal fire. Why? Jesus doesn't say, I was the altar call and you didn't respond to me. I was the sinner's prayer and you didn't repeat me. He says, I was naked, you didn't clothe me. I was a stranger, you didn't welcome me in. I was hungry, you didn't feed me. Jesus says, therefore, you missed it. Sorry, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Meanwhile, you guys clothed me, you fed me, you visited me in prison, so you're all good. That would, by evangelical standards, be salvation by works, would it not? So you can't claim that this is about hell and salvation as we think of hell and salvation without changing your doctrine of salvation. Again, it's not, I was the altar call and you didn't respond to me. It's that I was the stranger and you didn't welcome me. I was the least of these and you did not look after me. So again, you have no right to use this to describe hell and salvation unless, of course, you change your doctrine of salvation. Okay, now I want you to think about something here. It says the king comes in all of his glory, seated on his throne. But the place where he was to be found in life was with the lowly, with the poor, with the broken. One group was only interested in looking for God in things that they thought to be godlike, that is, royal and regal and all this kind of stuff that they attributed to favor and godlikeness. And God's like, I'm actually in the dirt with the one that you pass by and consider an outcast and unclean. You missed me there. And the ones who found him there didn't even know that they found, it wasn't like they were like, oh, Jesus is in that poor beggar, I'm going to take care of him. They just felt empathy for someone who was suffering, took care of that individual's needs, and Jesus says to them, you didn't even realize what you were doing, but I was present there. No sinner's prayer parade, nothing about them being a Christian, nothing. Just simply, they took care of the needs of humanity, and God says, you took care of me, you're in. But those of you who thought you were fighting for me when you excluded some, considered them outcasts and sinners and outsiders, you are actually working against me. Therefore, you are going to go to the place of torment prepared for the devil and his angels. Now, nowhere in the Hebrew scriptures that we have is there anything said about there being a place of fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Nowhere else in the New Testament that we have is there a reference to a place of punishment being prepared for the devil and his angels. So where is Jesus drawing this imagery from? Where does it come from? It comes from the book of 1 Enoch. Okay? Now in the book of 1 Enoch, here's basically how the story goes. It's the story of a fallen angel named Azazel who, with the help of his fallen cohorts, teach human beings the ways of war and conflict and teach women the art of seduction and how to put on makeup. And there's a lot more to it than that, but that's kind of how it goes. Okay? And in the book of Enoch, there is an accursed valley prepared for these angels to be judged in. And let me read you one specific verse here from this, from 1 Enoch 54, 1 through 10. It says, and I looked and turned to another part of the earth and saw there a deep valley with burning fire, and they brought the kings and the mighty and began to cast them into this deep valley. And there mine eyes saw how they made these their instruments, iron chains of immeasurable weight. And I asked the angel of peace who went with me, for whom are these chains being prepared? And he said unto me, these are being prepared for the hosts of Azazel, so that they may take them and cast them into the abyss of complete condemnation, and they shall cover their jaws with rough stones, as the Lord of spirits commanded. And Michael and Gabriel and Raphael and however you say his name shall take hold of them on that great day and cast them on that day into the burning furnace, that the Lord of spirits may take vengeance on them for their unrighteousness and becoming subject to Satan and leading astray those who dwell on the earth. And in those days shall punishment come from the Lord of spirits, and he will open all the chambers of waters which are above the heavens and of the fountains which are beneath the earth, and all the water shall be joined with the waters, that which is above the heavens, and the heavens is masculine, and the water which is beneath the earth is the feminine, and they shall destroy all who dwell on the earth and those who dwell under the ends of the heavens. And when they have recognized their unrighteousness, which they have wrought on the earth, then these shall they perish. Okay, anyways, I read more than I intended to read. But basically, we're told that this fallen angel Azazel, who's like the leader of this, gang of fallen angels who are corrupting the earth, there's a place, there's a valley of fire prepared for them in which they'll be judged and tormented forever. It's being prepared for them. Okay? Now, what's interesting in the parable of the sheep and the goats is that the goats are on the left hand of Jesus, right? Now on the day of atonement, when lots were drawn, and it was decided which goat would be sacrificed to Yahweh and which goat would be the scapegoat, it was thought to be favorable if the lot for the scapegoat fell to the goat on the left-hand side of the priest, because the left-hand side was understood to be unlucky. So here we have goat imagery, left-hand imagery, and the goat who became the scapegoat on the Day of Atonement, what happened to it? It wasn't sacrificed. What happened to it? It was sent into the wilderness. For what and to what? Well, let's read it here. Leviticus, I lost my spot here. Let's go to Leviticus 16, 7 through 10. It says, "He shall take the 2 goats and set them before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and Aaron shall cast lots on the 2 goats, one lot for the Lord and the other lot for Azazel. And Aaron shall present the goat on which the lot fell for the Lord and offer it as a sin offering, but the goat on which the lot fell for Azazel shall be presented alive before the Lord to make atonement over it, that it may be sent away into the wilderness to Azazel." Now, some just interpret that word as scapegoat, that the lot fell to it to be the scapegoat, but Azazel is also the name of a desert demon, of another sort of, which may have been elevated to the status of deity. Okay? And what is likely going on here is that one goat is sacrificed to the Lord, and then the other, which sort of absorbs symbolically the sins of Israel, was sent into the wilderness to this being, imagined, but still in their minds, a very real being named Azazel. And the point was, they were sending sin back to its source, sending sin away from them and back to the source of uncleanness. Okay? So, later on, Azazel develops, and this becomes the name of the fallen angel who leads this rebellion in the book of 1 Enoch, for whom is prepared a place of fire and judgment along with all of his fallen angel buddies. Now, in this parable of the sheep and the goats are on the left hand, and they're sent where? To a place of fire prepared for the devil and his angels. The scapegoat would be sent into the wilderness to Azazel, and here we have these who are considered goats being sent symbolically to the place where Azazel is. Simply meaning what? They're being sent back to their source. That, listen, you think you are fighting for God when you are looking for me in that which is outwardly regal and godlike, but you're missing me as I'm present in the least. You think it's holy when you behave in this exclusive manner. But let me show you what you actually look like by sending you back to your source. This isn't about literal eternal punishment and God burning some forever because they don't take care of the needs of the poor. This is God simply saying, look, this does not come from me. My nature as king is not, you're looking for me in the outwardly and externally powerful, but I'm present in the least. But you've ignored the least in pursuit of that which you think I'm actually like. And you think that's holiness. But let me send you back to your source symbolically to show you who you really look like. You look like the very enemy you think you're fighting against. So again, this isn't about literal hellfire and brimstone. This is God basically turning the tables on people who think they're in and using a parable to say, by your own logic, you're actually the ones who are outsiders. If we use your way of thinking about things, if we use your way of understanding God, you're actually the ones who are out. And the ones you think are out are actually the ones who are in. Okay. Does that make sense? No? Okay. I'm looking at the clock here, and it looks like we're butting up against 1 o'clock. So I'm going to stop, and we're going to do Q&A. Is that okay? Only because I don't want to keep you here too much longer, and I'm sure there's people who want to ask some questions and stuff. So anyways, I hope that made a little bit of sense. Hope it made you think a little bit about some stuff, and I guess now we're going to do some Q&A. So, okay.